You were not trying to do anything. That is the part that tends to get overlooked in every conversation about avoidant psychology. The assumption that the person on the other side of the dynamic was working towards something, angling for something, deploying their depth or their warmth or their particular quality of presence as a kind of calculated strategy designed to produce a specific effect in someone who was supposed to remain unaffected. You were not doing that. You were not running a strategy. You were not carefully constructing the version of yourself most likely to breach an avoidant defense. You were simply being yourself, fully honestly, without the performance and without the angle. And something happened that neither of you planned, and neither of you in the beginning fully understood. You touched something. Not through technique, not through the deliberate application of some quality you knew would register differently in this particular person, but through the entirely natural, entirely unpremeditated expression of who you actually are, your depth, your way of seeing. Your specific quality of presence in a moment, the particular thing you said or did not say, the way you held space or the way you moved through a conversation, without the usual social performance that most interactions require. Something in that landed in the avoidant in a way that their system did not have an adequate response to. It went past the usual processing, past the managed reception of external input that the avoidance defense typically provides, past the filter, past the distance-maintaining mechanism that usually ensures that other people's reality does not press too directly against the avoidance interior. It landed in the interior itself, without being invited in, without the avoidant having time to manage its arrival. And now they cannot stop thinking about you. The cannot stop thinking is not a casual experience for the avoidant. It is not the ordinary background awareness of someone who is pleasant company and whose absence is mildly noticed. It is something considerably more activated than that, something that does not respond to the usual management techniques. Something that surfaces in the gaps between deliberate activity with a persistence that the avoidant finds, depending on their level of self-awareness, either confusing or deeply uncomfortable or both. Because the avoidance system is not designed for this, is not calibrated for the experience of another person occupying the interior without permission. The defense was built precisely to prevent this kind of involuntary presence. To keep other people at the level of pleasant or unpleasant, but ultimately manageable, to ensure that no one's presence in the interior becomes the kind of persistent, directional, specifically textured occupation that constitutes genuine impact. When the impact happens anyway, when someone reaches past the defense without targeting it, without even being aware that they were doing it, simply by being themselves in a way that the defense had no protocol for, the avoidant is left in a condition their system did not prepare them for. Someone is in the interior, and they are not leaving. The thinking takes specific forms. It is worth understanding what it actually looks like in the avoidance experience, because the generic description of someone not being able to stop thinking about a person does not capture the particular quality of what happens when an avoidant has been genuinely reached. It is not the thinking of someone who is consciously choosing to dwell on a person because the dwelling is pleasant. The avoidant is not sitting down and deciding to revisit the experience of the connection because it feels good to do so. The thinking arrives without being summoned. It interrupts. It surfaces in the middle of genuinely unrelated activity, in the middle of work, in the middle of a conversation with someone else, in the middle of the specific deliberate busyness that the avoidant often uses to maintain the interior distance that the defense requires. It arrives in those moments, and it has a quality that distinguishes it immediately from ordinary background awareness. It has texture, specificity. It is not the generic presence of a person as a concept, but the specific presence of particular moments, particular exchanges. The specific quality of something that was said, or the specific way a silence was held, or the particular thing about the person's manner of being that registered in a way the avoidant cannot fully account for. The thinking is detailed. It returns to specific things. It is the kind of thinking that indicates genuine impression rather than surface contact. The kind that happens when something actually changed something in the interior rather than simply passing through it. The avoidant will often not tell you this, will often not tell themselves this, at least not in the direct, undefended language of someone who can simply acknowledge that another person has affected them. The interior acknowledgement, if it happens at all, tends to be indirect, to arrive in the form of the noticing rather than the naming. The avoidant notices that the person keeps surfacing, notices that the thinking has a specific quality different from ordinary social awareness, notices that the absence of the person, in whatever form the absence takes, whether the connection is currently active or suspended, or simply less present than the avoidant would prefer without having acknowledged the preference, has a shape, a specific textured named shape. That noticing is the acknowledgement that the defense would not permit to become explicit. The avoidant allows themselves to notice without allowing themselves to fully name what the noticing means. Because naming it means acknowledging the impact. And acknowledging the impact means acknowledging the vulnerability. And the vulnerability, the genuine, unchosen, arriving without permission vulnerability of having been genuinely touched by another person, is precisely what the entire architecture was designed to prevent. What was it about you specifically? This is the question that deserves genuine attention, because the avoidance cannot stop thinking is not a generic response to attractive or interesting people. Many people are attractive, many people are interesting. Many people have qualities that the avoidant can appreciate and enjoy without their appreciation creating any particular disruption in the carefully maintained interior distance. What you produced was different, and understanding what produced it, not as a strategy for replication, but as genuine self-knowledge about what you carry and what it does when it meets a defended interior, is worth exploring honestly. The avoidance defense is calibrated against the ordinary social presentations of intimacy, against the obviously needy, the obviously pursuing, the obviously invested in a particular outcome quality of someone who is trying to make an impression. The defense reads those presentations easily and deploys the appropriate management without difficulty. It has excellent protocols for managing people who are visibly working toward a specific relational goal. What it does not have adequate protocols for is genuine authenticity that is not organized around any relational goal at all. Presence that is simply present, not performing presence, not deploying presence as a means toward a specific end, but inhabiting presence as the natural, unself-conscious, fully arrived expression of a person who is simply being what they are in the moment they are in. That quality, the genuine, unself-conscious, not angled toward anything quality of authentic presence, is what tends to breach the avoidant defense not through force, but through irrelevance. The defense does not know how to manage something that is not trying to get past it. It is designed to manage approach. It does not have an adequate response to someone who is simply there, fully and honestly, without any apparent agenda regarding the defense's maintenance or dissolution. Your authenticity was the thing, not the specific content of it, not any particular quality or achievement or characteristic that could be identified and reproduced strategically. The authenticity itself, the quality of someone who has arrived at themselves and is expressing that arrival naturally, without the social performance that most people maintain as a kind of relational armor of their own. The avoidant, whose own self-expression is so thoroughly managed by the defense, encountered someone whose self-expression was not managed in that way, and the contrast was striking at a level beneath conscious observation. The avoidant felt the difference before they thought the difference, felt it in the specific, involuntary, precognitive way that genuine contrast registers in a nervous system that has been calibrated against the managed presentations it usually encounters. Something is different here. That recognition arrived before the defense could process it and determine whether it was the kind of different that required management. By the time the defense was mobilized, the impression was already made, already in the interior, already the thing that would not stop surfacing in the gaps between deliberate activity. The heart that was touched does not untouched itself. This is the irreversibility that the avoidant is living with. Whether they are currently in contact with the person who touched it, or whether the distance has been established, or whether the connection is active but the avoidant is managing their own response to it with the characteristic practiced skill of someone who has been maintaining interior distance for most of their intimate life. The touching happened. It cannot be managed backward. The interior has been reorganized, in some small or not so small way, by the genuine impact of encountering someone whose authentic presence pressed through the defense without targeting it. And the thinking, the persistent, specific, detail returning, cannot be summoned or dismissed thinking, is the evidence of that reorganization. The avoidance interior returning, again and again to the impression that was made, trying to understand it, trying to process it, trying to make the meaning of it available to the conscious mind that the initial impact bypassed entirely. There is something that the avoidant is doing in the cannot stop thinking that is not simply the passive experience of being affected. Something more active, though it does not feel active from the inside. It feels more like being visited than like visiting. more like something happening to them than something they are doing. But what is actually happening is a kind of recalibration that the interior is attempting. The avoidance internal model of other people, the model that was built from early experience and refined through the pattern of subsequent relationships. The model that says people who reach you are dangerous and people who are present enough to matter are present enough to hurt you, that model encountered data that does not fit. You did not fit the model. Not because you were trying not to fit it, because you were genuinely yourself in a way that the model had not adequately accounted for. And the interior, being the pattern recognition and prediction generating system that all interiors are, is now working on the discrepancy. Returning to the data, re-examining the specific instances of the encounter that produced the impact. Trying to understand what is different about this person, why this presence registered differently, why this contact created the impression that the usual defense prevented all the others from creating. The thinking is the attempted processing of a genuine anomaly, someone who did not behave according to the model, someone whose presence introduced information that the model does not know how to integrate without updating. And the updating of a model that has been running the same basic operating premises for most of a person's adult life is not a quick or comfortable process. It is the process that the thinking is attempting, slowly, without full awareness of what it is doing, in the gaps and the interruptions and the specific detailed returns to the moments of genuine contact. The person who unintentionally touched the avoidance heart tends not to know they did it. This is perhaps the most disorienting aspect of the experience, the asymmetry between the impact that was created and the awareness of having created it. You were simply being yourself. The depth that registered was not deployed, it was lived. The authenticity that breached the defense was not calculated. It was simply the natural expression of someone who has done enough work on themselves to be genuinely present without the performance that self-consciousness requires. And yet the impact was real and significant, and the avoidant is now carrying it in the interior in the form of the persistent, specific, cannot be dismissed thinking that constitutes genuine impression. You may have felt something in the dynamic, some sense of the connection being real, of the contact being genuine, of something being present between you that had a different quality than the ordinary texture of social interaction. But the scale of the impact, the specific interior, the defense, was actually breached quality of what happened on the avoidance side may not be fully visible to you, may have been obscured by the avoidance characteristic behavioral management of their response to it, by the coolness that arrived as a response to the warmth of the impact, by the distance that was created precisely because the contact was too genuine to be comfortable. The behavior said one thing, the interior was saying something entirely different. And the thinking, the persistent, ongoing, specific thinking that has not stopped and that the avoidant has not found adequate ways to dismiss, is the evidence of the interior's actual assessment. Knowing this, knowing that the impact was real and that the thinking is ongoing, and that the avoidance interior has been genuinely reorganized by the encounter with someone who was simply authentically themselves, changes something in the person who was the source of the impact. Not in the direction of obligation, not as the reason to remain in the dynamic at whatever cost the dynamic imposes, not as the instruction to wait for the avoidance interior processing to eventually produce the behavioral change that would bring the genuine feeling into adequate expression, but in the direction of self-knowledge, of the specific, grounded, deeply confirming kind of self-knowledge that comes from understanding what it is about you that produces this effect in defended people. What quality of your presence, unperformed, unstrategized, simply genuine, is the thing that reaches past the defenses that other approaches cannot breach. That quality is yours. It is not the result of luck or accident, or the fortunate alignment of your authentic expression with some specific avoidance particular vulnerability. It is the result of having become genuinely yourself, of having done the interior work that produces authentic presence rather than performed presence, of having arrived at yourself in a way that most people are still in the process of attempting. That arrival, the genuine, unself-conscious, not performing for anyone inhabitation of your own authentic self, is the thing that touched the avoidance heart, not a technique, not a strategy. You, simply, completely, without apology or management, or the performance of any quality you did not genuinely possess. You walked into the space as yourself. And the avoidant, whose entire system was designed to remain untouched by exactly that kind of genuine presence, found themselves touched anyway, found the thinking starting, and found it would not stop. found the impression made and found it would not unmake itself, found, in the specific and involuntary evidence of the cannot stop thinking, that someone had reached the interior that was supposed to be unreachable, not by trying, by simply being. That is not nothing. That is the rarest thing available in human connection, and it belongs, completely and permanently, to you, not as something you did, as something you are. What you are is not something the avoidance response confirmed. That distinction matters, and it is worth holding carefully, because there is a version of receiving the information about the avoidance cannot stop thinking that locates the significance of the self in the impact it created. That finds the confirmation of worth in the fact of having touched something in a defended person. That makes the validation dependent, even subtly, on the avoidance interior response as the evidence that the authentic self was genuine and valuable and worth being. That version is understandable. It is the very human tendency to seek the confirmation of one's own reality in its reflection in another person's experience of it. To feel most certain of what one is when someone else's response confirms it with unmistakable clarity. And the avoidance response, the specific, involuntary, cannot be managed quality of genuine impact, is a particularly compelling form of confirmation. Because it was not asked for, was not produced by the avoidance conscious choice to validate the person, was not the generous output of someone trying to make the other person feel seen. It arrived despite the defense, despite the management, despite the entire apparatus of distance maintenance that the avoidant deploys to prevent exactly that kind of confirming response from being visible. Confirmation that arrives despite resistance has a particular quality of authority. It feels more real than confirmation that is offered freely, more trustworthy than the warmth of someone who gives warmth easily, more significant than the impact made on someone who is readily impacted. The very difficulty of reaching an avoidant interior makes the reaching when it happens feel like the strongest possible evidence of what was real about the encounter. But the self that did the reaching, the authentic, unperformed, arrived at through genuine interior work self, that walked into the space simply being what it was, that self existed before the avoidance response confirmed it, was real and whole and genuinely valuable before the impact was made. Would have been exactly as real and whole and genuinely valuable if the specific avoidant had been less defended, had responded with easier warmth, had not produced the particular quality of resistant confirmation that makes the impact feel so significant. The self does not require the avoidant's reluctant confirmation to be what it is. The authenticity that produced the impact was already there. Was the result of the person's own work, their own development, their own genuine arriving at themselves through whatever combination of experience and reflection and genuine interior engagement brought them to the quality of presence they currently inhabit? The avoidant encountered something that was already fully real, did not create it, did not validate it into existence, simply responded to it with the involuntary defense bypassing, cannot stop thinking evidence of its impact. That impact is information about the encounter. The self is information about the person. Those are different things, and conflating them, allowing the significance of the avoidance response to become the foundation of the person's understanding of their own value, creates a dependency that the actual situation does not require and does not warrant. The person who unintentionally touched the avoidant's heart carries that capacity into every space they enter, not just into the spaces occupied by avoidance. Not only as the quality that reaches defended interiors, but as the general quality of someone whose authentic presence has a particular effect on the people who encounter it, defended or not, avoidant or not, carrying their particular history and their particular capacity for receiving genuine human contact or not. The effect is not always the avoidance cannot stop thinking. Sometimes it is the straightforward recognition of someone who is simply ready to receive it. The person who encounters genuine authenticity and responds with genuine authenticity in return. Without the drama of the defense being breached, without the delay of the management being overcome, simply the clean reciprocal experience of two people who are both actually present, meeting in the ordinary space of an interaction, and finding it genuinely nourishing. That straightforward version, the clean, undramatic, mutually present version of genuine contact, is the destination that the avoidant dynamic was always pointing toward without being able to produce. The connection that the genuine, authentic self has always been capable of generating in the right conditions. The conditions where the person on the other side is not spending the majority of their relational energy on the management of the connection's depth, but on the actual inhabitation of it. Understanding this, really understanding it, not as a consoling idea, but as the accurate description of what the authentic self produces and what it deserves in return, reframes the avoidant dynamic in a way that is genuinely liberating rather than simply theoretically interesting. The avoidance cannot stop thinking is the evidence of what the authentic self is capable of producing, even in the most defended conditions, in conditions that were specifically designed to prevent that kind of impact. Against a defense that had been refined over years and possibly decades of protecting against exactly that quality of genuine contact. And if that is what the authentic self produces in the most defended available conditions, the involuntary, management-resistant, persistent genuine impact of someone who could not be untouched, then consider what it produces in the less defended conditions. In the encounters with people who have done enough of their own interior work to be genuinely available to receive what the authentic self offers, without the years of elaborate protection standing between the offer and its reception, the impact in those conditions is not the reluctant, cannot stop thinking impact of a defense being breached despite itself. It is something more complete, more mutual, the specific, uncomplicated, genuinely received experience of one person's authentic presence meeting another person's authentic presence and producing in both of them the lived evidence that genuine human contact is possible, that it feels the way it is supposed to feel, that it does not require the ongoing interpretive labor of someone trying to read defended signals and generous translation of insufficient behavior. It simply feels like connection, real, present, mutually inhabited, not requiring analysis or interpretation, or the management of the space between what is felt and what is expressed. The avoidant carrying the cannot stop thinking in their interior is in some sense in the presence of the best possible demonstration of what they have been defending against, not the dangerous thing, not the threat that the nervous system has been treating genuine intimacy as, but the actual thing. The real, specific, undeniable evidence of what genuine human contact with an authentic person actually is, and what it does to an interior that was willing, even involuntarily, even through the breach of the defense rather than the willing opening of it, to let it in. They are thinking about you because you showed them something, not deliberately, not as a demonstration, but through the simple fact of your genuine presence. You showed them what it feels like when another person is actually there, when the interaction is not managed from both sides. When someone's way of being in the space does not require the constant calibration of distance and temperature, and the monitoring of how much of the interior is becoming visible. You showed them the thing they have been protecting against, and you showed them, without intending to, that it was not what they were protecting against, that the thing they had been treating as threat was actually this. The specific, real, unperformed quality of someone who has arrived at themselves and brings that arrival into the space without apology or agenda. That showing is the heart touching, the reorganization of the interior model, the cannot stop thinking that follows from encountering something that the model had categorized as dangerous, and finding, in the actual experience of it, that the categorization was wrong. The avoidant does not know what to do with that discovery. Not yet. Possibly not for a long time. The interior recognition that the category was wrong, that the genuine, authentic presence they encountered was not the threat the defense was managing against, does not automatically translate into the behavioral change that would allow them to act from the recognition. Does not immediately dissolve the architecture that produced the defense, does not mean that the next time genuine authenticity is in proximity, the avoidant will simply open toward it, without the pattern reasserting. The recognition is the beginning of a recalibration, not the recalibration itself. The beginning, the seed of a different understanding of what genuine human contact actually is, planted in an interior that had been organized around the premise that genuine human contact was the most threatening available condition. Seeds need conditions, they need time, they need the right interior environment, one that has been adequately prepared by the kind of genuine, sustained, supported interior work that actually changes the premises the psyche operates from, rather than simply introducing new information to a system that will file it alongside the old premises without integrating it. Whether the avoidant creates those conditions is entirely their own process, their own choice, their own timeline. The person who unintentionally touched their heart has no part to play in whether the seed becomes something, cannot tend it, cannot accelerate it, cannot provide the conditions from the outside that the avoidant needs to find on the inside. What the person can do, what belongs genuinely to them in the wake of understanding what happened and what it means, is carry the knowledge of their own authentic capacity with greater deliberateness than before. not greater self-consciousness. The authenticity that produced the impact was precisely unself-conscious, and deliberate self-consciousness would alter its quality, but greater intentionality about the conditions in which it is offered. The authentic self that touched the avoidance heart was offered, unintentionally, into conditions that were not designed to receive it adequately. Conditions organized around the management of exactly that quality of genuine presence. The receiving was imperfect, partial, mediated by the defense that the impact managed to breach but not dissolve. The cannot stop thinking is the evidence that something genuine was received. It is also the evidence that the receiving was not the full, clean, mutually present reception that the authentic self actually deserves. That full reception is available not in conditions organized around managed distance. In conditions where both people are genuinely present, genuinely available, genuinely doing the ongoing work of their own interior lives in ways that make them actually capable of receiving what authentic presence offers without needing the defense to mediate the experience. Those conditions are findable. They are the conditions that another person who has done comparable interior work naturally inhabits. The conditions that genuine mutual authenticity produces when it meets itself without the defense standing in the way. The conditions where the heart touching is not an involuntary breach of a protective architecture, but the natural, intended, mutually welcomed experience of two people who are both actually there. The avoidant will keep thinking about you. That is not going to stop on any particular timeline you can predict or influence. The impression was genuine, and genuine impressions do not simply dissolve when the person who made them stops being actively present. They persist. They continue their work on the interior at their own pace, in their own way, producing whatever reorganization they produce in a system that was touched despite its protection. Let them think about you, not as a strategy, not as the deliberate withholding of presence calculated to maintain the power of the impression, but as the natural, appropriate, self-respecting reality of someone who is not available to be the object of someone else's interior processing, without the corresponding behavioral reality of genuine, reciprocal, showing up presence. The thinking is theirs. The interior reorganization is theirs. The eventual choice about whether the recognition produces behavioral change is theirs. Your life is yours. The authentic self that produced the impact is yours, not as something you did, as something you are. And what you are deserves to be met, not thought about in silence, not carried in an interior that will not let itself be seen, not admired from behind the management of a defense that found the impact too real to receive without the protection. Met, actually fully, in the present, with the complete availability of someone who has done enough of their own work to let genuine presence in without the alarm going off. That meeting is what the authentic self has always been oriented toward, not the avoidant silent thinking. The full, mutual, present, alarm-free receiving of what you genuinely are, by someone who can actually hold it, without needing to stop thinking about it first, because they are too busy actually being with you, in the ordinary days, that are genuinely beautifully enough. The ordinary days with someone who can actually be in them, fully without the management, without the temperature monitoring, without the characteristic avoidant texture of presence that is slightly less present than the situation warrants. Those days feel different from the inside in a way that is worth describing, not because the description makes them more attainable or accelerates the arrival of the person who can inhabit them genuinely, but because having a clear, felt, honest sense of what the destination actually feels like is part of what keeps the person oriented toward it rather than toward the compelling but insufficient approximation of it that the avoidant dynamic consistently offered. The difference is not dramatic. That is the first thing to understand about what genuine mutual presence actually feels like in the ordinary texture of a connection. It does not feel like the intensity of the avoidant dynamic. Does not carry the specific charge of something that is always slightly uncertain, always slightly at stake, always requiring the interpretive engagement of someone who is trying to read the space between what is being said and what is actually happening in the interior of the other person. It feels quieter than that, more settled, like a condition rather than an achievement, like something that is simply the ambient quality of the connection rather than the occasional peak that justifies the investment in the connection's ordinary insufficiency. That settled quality is what the avoidant dynamic was never able to sustain, not because the feeling was absent, the feeling was always real, but because the settled quality requires both people to be actually, consistently, without the management present. And the avoidant, however genuine the feeling, however real the cannot stop thinking, however unmistakable the impact of the authentic person who touched their heart. The avoidant was not consistently without the management present, was present in the peaks and managed in the ordinary days, was genuine in the unguarded moments and defended in the habitual ones, was there in the feeling and somewhere else in the behavior. The settled quality comes from consistency, from the accumulated evidence, not in a single significant moment, but across the ordinary unremarkable days, that the other person is actually going to be there, not conditionally, not motivated by the heightened stakes of a particular situation, not performing presence in the moments when presence is obviously called for, but simply, reliably, as the default expression of someone who has chosen this connection and continues to choose it in the ordinary conditions where the choosing costs something real. That consistency does its work slowly. It does not produce trust in a single demonstration, however genuine. It produces trust the way water produces a path, through repeated contact with the same surface over sufficient time, gradually, without drama, until the path is there and its presence feels natural rather than remarkable. The trust that genuine, consistent presence builds is the kind that the body knows rather than just the mind. The kind that does not require constant monitoring of the other person's temperature, because the temperature has been reliably warm across enough ordinary days that the nervous system has updated its prediction, has stopped bracing for the cooling, has incorporated the evidence of consistent warmth into its model of what this specific connection reliably provides. The avoidant dynamic never produced that update. The nervous system of the person in the avoidant dynamic was perpetually bracing, perpetually monitoring, perpetually incorporating the evidence of the inconsistent warmth into a model that could not update toward reliable prediction, because the reliability was not present in the data. The data said, sometimes warm, sometimes managed, no clear pattern that allows confident prediction of which is coming. And a nervous system with that data does not settle, cannot settle, will remain in the low-level vigilance of someone who has learned that the temperature can change without warning, and who has therefore made a sensible adaptation of staying attentive to it. Releasing that vigilance is one of the most significant physiological experiences of leaving the avoidant dynamic and entering the conditions of genuine mutual presence. It does not happen immediately. The nervous system does not abandon its calibration simply because the person has changed the conditions. It waits for the new data. It requires the accumulation of consistent warmth across sufficient ordinary days before it begins to update the prediction, before it begins to release the monitoring, before the background scanning for temperature change starts to quiet because the temperature is simply not changing in the ways the scanning was attuned to detect. That quieting, the gradual reduction of the vigilance as the new data accumulates, is one of the most distinctly felt differences between the avoidant dynamic and genuine mutual presence. Not the presence of warmth exactly, the avoidant dynamic had warmth, but the reliability of it, the absence of the bracing, the specific cumulative body-level experience of a nervous system that is no longer required to be on guard against the cooling it learned to anticipate. The person who experiences that quieting for the first time after a significant period in the avoidant dynamic tends to find it disorienting before they find it nourishing. The vigilance had become so normalized as the ambient condition of intimate relationship that its absence initially feels like something is missing, like the connection is somehow less engaged than it should be, less alive, less charged with the particular intensity that the uncertainty of the avoidant dynamic reliably produced. But that intensity was anxiety, not depth, and the quietness that replaces it in conditions of genuine mutual presence is not the quietness of insufficient depth. It is the quietness of actual safety, of a nervous system that has received enough consistent evidence to update its prediction towards something that does not require ongoing monitoring, of a body that is, for perhaps the first time in the intimate relational context, genuinely at rest. Genuine rest in an intimate connection is rarer than it should be. It is also more valuable than the intensity that the avoidant dynamic produced, though the value is not always immediately apparent to someone who has been calibrated toward the intensity as the evidence of something real. The intensity feels like caring, like stakes, like the evidence that the connection matters enough to generate the charged quality of constant uncertainty and constant interpretive engagement. But stakes produced by anxiety and stakes produced by genuine depth are not the same experience, however similar they may feel in the activated moment. Anxiety stakes feel like the connection could be lost at any moment if the right conditions are not maintained. They produce the specific engagement of someone who is working to keep something that might not stay. Depth stakes feel like the connection is real enough to deserve genuine presence and genuine investment. They produce the specific engagement of someone who is in something real and is choosing to be in it fully rather than working to maintain the conditions of its continuance. The distinction is felt in what the engagement costs. Anxiety stakes are exhausting in the specific way of maintenance labor. The ongoing work of keeping something stable that has an inherent instability, the chronic expenditure of interpretive energy and emotional generosity, and the monitoring of signals that might indicate the stability is shifting. Depth stakes are demanding in a different way. They demand genuine presence rather than the performance of it. They demand the willingness to be actually known rather than strategically presented. They demand the showing up in the ordinary days rather than the concentrated effort of the significant moments. They are demanding in the ways that genuine intimacy is demanding, in the ways that produce growth rather than depletion. The person who touched the avoidance heart is capable of the depth stakes engagement, has always been capable of it, was bringing it to the avoidant dynamic but finding it received in the anxiety stakes context, finding the genuine presence met with the management of it, finding the authentic showing up met with the intermittent response of someone for whom genuine showing up was the threatening thing rather than the natural expression of caring. In conditions of genuine mutual presence, the depth stakes engagement finds its natural environment. The showing up is met with showing up. The genuine presence is met with genuine presence. The authentic self that touched the avoidance heart, that had the impact it had precisely because it was unmanaged, genuinely arrived at, not performing any quality it did not actually possess. That self finds in the conditions of genuine mutual presence the specific experience of being actually received. Not processed, not managed. Not received through the filter of a defense that was deciding, in real time, how much of the impact to allow through and how much to redirect into something more manageable. Actually received. With the full, open, not bracing quality of someone who has done enough of their own work to let genuine presence in without the alarm converting the reception into management. That experience of being genuinely received by someone who is genuinely present is the thing the authentic self has always been oriented toward, and the avoidant dynamic was always preventing. The cannot stop thinking of the avoidant was the evidence of partial reception, of the impact making it past the outer layers of the defense and lodging in the interior, producing the persistent thinking that indicates genuine impression. But partial reception is not full reception. The thinking is not the same as the meeting. The impression is not the same as the genuine mutual present experience of two people actually in each other's authentic company. Full reception feels different from partial reception, in the same way that being genuinely seen feels different from being noticed. Being noticed is the registration of presence. Being seen is the accurate, engaged, genuinely interested perception of what the presence actually contains. The avoidant noticed. The cannot stop thinking is the evidence of noticing at a depth that the defense was not able to prevent. But seeing, the full, open, ongoing, not requiring the breach of a defense kind of seeing, requires conditions that the avoidant dynamic was not providing. Those conditions are available. They exist in the connections between people who are both genuinely present and genuinely doing their own interior work and genuinely available to each other without the management standing between the offer and its reception. Those connections are not common, but they are real. They are the destination that the authentic self's capacity has always been pointed toward. The natural environment for the quality of presence that was unintentionally touching defended interiors and producing the cannot stop thinking evidence of genuine impact in people who were supposed to remain unaffected. The avoidance cannot stop thinking is, in some sense, their most honest moment, more honest than the behavior that preceded it, more honest than the management that followed the impact, more honest than whatever narrative the avoidant constructed to explain the distance they created in response to being genuinely touched. In the cannot stop thinking, stripped of the management, stripped of the behavioral expression that the defense requires, the avoidant is simply in the presence of what is actually true for them, what was actually real in the encounter, what the authentic person actually did to their interior when the defense had nothing adequate to manage it with. Knowing that, knowing it with a specific, accurate, non-inflated understanding of what it means and what it does not mean, the person who unintentionally created that impact can hold the knowledge without being organized around it, can let it be what it is. Real information about a real encounter with a real person whose interior was genuinely touched, not a reason to wait, not a reason to remain available to conditions that are not yet providing what genuine mutual presence requires. not a reason to structure the ongoing life around the hope that the cannot stop thinking will eventually produce the behavioral change that would bring the genuine interior reality into adequate expression. Simply real information, held clearly, alongside everything else that is true, alongside the full, honest, accurate picture of the complete dynamic, rather than only the most flattering parts of it. The avoidant cannot stop thinking about you. And you get to keep living, fully, in the actual texture of the actual days, with the actual people who are actually there, building the actual connections that are actually able to receive what you bring, not the thinking about you, the actual being with you. The showing up in the ordinary days, the settled, quiet, vigilance-free, warm as the baseline experience of someone who chose you and keeps choosing you, and does not require the management of genuine presence, because genuine presence is not the threatening thing for them. It is the wanted thing, the sought thing, the thing they built themselves toward rather than built themselves against. That person exists, is not a consolation for the avoidance impact, is the actual destination. The place the authentic self was always going. Before the avoidant was encountered, after they are no longer the primary occupant of the interior, in the genuine, forward-moving, completely inhabited life that has always been the real story. Yours. Not the cannot stop thinking, the actual being here, present, with you. In the ordinary days, that are, it turns out, the most extraordinary thing available, when both people are actually in them.